Hello again. Last time we did some busy work, just introducing you to me and to the course and to what we're going to be doing. Today I'd like to start zeroing in on some of our more important work. Particularly, I'd like to begin a discussion which will enable us to define the term politics. It's a slippery term. There are many ways to slice it and dice it. And everybody knows it's bad. Everybody knows it's corrupt. So what we have to do is find a way to talk about politics that is value-free, that is not ideological, that is not dogmatic, and one that we can do something with. So let's try to begin that. First, we'd have to say politics is concerned with society. Politics is related directly to society. Very well. Then what is society? Books after book after book has been written on the nature of society. And this is no time to get into all the niceties and distinctions of all the different definitions. But something we can pull out of all these definitions, I think, comes down to this. Society is a group of human persons who are bound together by certain things that are hard and concrete. For example, language, a certain history, a certain set of experiences, a certain set of ideas about who they were. The Bible is a very important example of where we Americans get our ideas about who we are and where we came from and what we ought to be. So we are bound together by a number of hard, identifiable things like language, experience, World War II, World War I, Vietnam, ISIS, whatever, and by other less tangible things, a set of ideas that kind of explain all that. Which is to say, we exist in a, here's a term for you, subjective reality. Subjective means the individual person. Subjectively, I think that I am something. That is a subjective reality. Other people who share what I have been also have that subjective reality. This is a point in unusual class when I say, am I communicating with you? Am I understanding? Are you understanding me? Am I speaking clearly? I can't do that. It's very frustrating. You're going to have to let me know whether this is working or not. The point is that I wish to speak of society as a group of individuals who have a shared subjective reality. They think about themselves as being part of it. So that's about as much jargon as I'm going to hit you with today. Society is a group of human beings who are identified by a shared subjective reality. Now, a society, in order to continue to exist, has to do certain things. It has to protect itself from other groups of people who have different shared subjective realities. Fair enough? Protection is very important. But far more important even than that, society must create a set of rules, a set of procedures, ways of doing things that enable the members of that society to function effectively. Society has to create laws. Society has to create rules. Society has to create structures for getting certain things done. And it must do it over time, over and over and over again. This is something that every human grouping has to deal with. Defense, providing order. Now, let me just take a little aside here. The question of how societies best provide order is the subject of what we refer to as political philosophy. Aristotle had a lot to say about that. Donald Trump has a lot to say about that. Ronald Montaperto, Montaperto, has a lot to say about that. Many people do. Political philosophy, sometimes it's called normative political theory, and sometimes it's just called plain political theory. I've just introduced you to a subfield of the larger field of political science, the study of politics. So, all societies have these functions that they must perform, and they do certain things to perform them. Question: does everybody in a society have a particular role to play? Does everybody have an equal role to play? Well, that's a question. That's a question that we'll come to in just a moment. Now let me try to say the same thing to you in a somewhat different way. In all society, and I'm introducing another new concept here, in all societies, there is a concept or a thing called public goods. Peace, order, health, roads, education, things that need to be done in order to guarantee the prosperity and the growing and the vigorousness of the society involved. Public goods. And different people have different ideas, first of all, about what is or is not a public good, and secondly, how to go about it. Some people in the United States today believe that medical insurance is a public good. Other people say, no, it's a private good. Some people, most people say education in the United States is a public good. Others say no, education is a private matter that is best left to families. We have these arguments all of the time. The reason I mention them is because it introduces the idea of politics as a process by which individuals who share a common imagined reality argue or decide or compete for a share of public goods. It's a question of who gets what and how they go about getting it. So the first thing then is that politics is competitive. But remember I said something earlier about how societies create rules and patterns and ways of going about things and so on? Societies, if politics is competition for public goods, then it occurs within certain rules and is worked upon by certain kinds of institutions. We call these rules and institutions government. In other words, in order to survive, societies must do something, some things. We've talked about what those things are. And now we're saying that one thing that they do is they create rules, regulations, orders, a whole bunch of things, and I'm just going to refer to that as government. Every human grouping must create government in order to regulate the way people interact for what they see to be public goods. Sometimes everybody is involved in government. In fact, our own founders say that in order to secure and so on and so forth, For these purposes, governments are instituted among men. That is the Declaration of Independence, which is required reading for all of us. In other societies, people say, well, we have to do this for the benefit of a particular race. And so we have Nazi Germany, where they thought it was perfectly fine to kill Jews and non-Germans, and so on. The point I'm trying to make here is that government is a necessity. The form that any particular government takes is a question of the history, the way in which the people imagine their reality. Our forebears, the colonists, had a particular view of who they were. That is reflected in how we set up our government. Hitler had a particular view of who he and the Germans are. He set up a government in a particular way. Mao Zedong in China, Stalin in Russia had particular views of who was involved. And they set up their government in particular ways. So if you like, we have to recognize that all governments exist in order to perform certain functions. That doesn't mean that there is agreement on what functions should be performed, or better yet, how to perform them. It doesn't even mean that there is agreement as to who is entitled to compete for public goods. In our own experience, if you were black, you were not entitled to compete for public goods. At our founding, an individual with black skin, never mind anything else, was considered to be 3/5 of one human being. So the question is, I said I wanted something to be value neutral. What I've tried to do is to set up a framework in which we can think about politics. The idea is as follows. We live in societies. Societies must do certain things in order to function and prosper, just to exist. For such purposes, they set up rules. I'm going to say, for such purposes, they set up governance. Governments can take many forms. The form a particular government takes is a function of the history and the culture, the shared subjective reality of the citizens. But not all people in the society necessarily are citizens. Blacks were not citizens. They were 3/5 of a citizen. Jews were not citizens in Germany. They were non-persons. Capitalists in Russia and China were not citizens. They were effectively enemies that had to be dealt with. Now, all of this, that's kind of a general statement. What I'd like to do now, with your permission, is get a little bit more specific. This is a class in political science, and you probably need to know something about the history of political science. I have just given an idea, a framework, with the germ of an idea, and I claim a certain originality for that. There are people who've done a far better job than I have done. And to help you better understand that point, I'd like to just go through 3 definitions of politics, more specific. In other words, what I've said may be folksy and down to earth, but it really isn't very jazzy. And it doesn't sound academic. And given the money you're paying, you ought to walk out of this with a vocabulary and with a little bit of an attitude. So let me help you develop some attitude. We can say that politics is the process by which a society decides who gets what, when, where, and how. That formulation was one that my professors was raised on, and therefore I was raised on, by a man named Harris D. Laswell. Politics is the process by which a society decides who is going to get what, when, where, and how. A second, more nuanced, and I think more sophisticated version is, politics is the process by which a society makes an authoritative allocation of values. This is a little bit more difficult. Why do we obey the law? I would argue because, in one sense, we're afraid of what will happen if we don't. But second, at a deeper and more meaningful level, I think we obey the law because we see that it is the product of a collective effort by our entire society, by the institutions in which we believe. We allow people power over us. We give government power over us. We think it is right and legitimate that government should have that power. The word here is legitimate. We think it is legitimate that government compel us to do certain kinds of things. That way, power becomes transformed into authority. You see the difference? Power becomes authority. Why? Because the people who are the subject of that power being exercised agree that government should be able to do that. Our government is legitimate, we think. Now, we often argue over how much power is legitimate, how much isn't. But when all is said and done, we agree, we have faith in the value of our system. We deal with authority. So, when government makes a decision about who's going to get what, when, where, and how, we can say it is authoritatively allocating certain public goods. We can build a hospital. We can build an aircraft carrier. One precludes the other, usually, though we try to have it both ways, as perhaps we should. Whatever the decision is, it's accepted because we say government has authority. We okay with that? I hope so. And the last thing I want to say, well, almost the last thing I want to say, and we'll come back to this later, it's a little bit of a stretch. But would you just bear with me and say, and I want you to think about this. In fact, I think this is your first discussion question. Politics can be described as civil war by other means. We fight for each other. We fight with each other. But we don't kill each other. And there really are no victors. And there are no victors. And there are no vanquished. At least that's how politics in America used to be. Now, I just made a value judgment, and you're free to question me on that. One of the problems is we're now talking about victors and vanquished, and that probably is part of our difficulty. Now, absolutely, the last thing I want to say on this is that 5 points about politics that are extremely important. First, politics is a process. Politics is rational. People engage in politics for a purpose, and the actions they take are designed to achieve a certain result. Thus, number one, politics is rational. 2, politics is institutional. Competition occurs within the framework of certain organizations, laws, practices, traditions that influence the actions that people are able to take. 2, politics is institutional. 3, politics is collective. Politics, by definition, involves cooperating with other citizens. Politics, by definition, requires collective action. You've got to outvote the other guy. Even if you live in North Korea, where the effective citizenry may amount to, 50 people? They're all competing, and they have to get people to support them to get what they want. So whether it's a tyranny like North Korea or a democracy like ours, politics is collective. Fourth, the objective of politics is policy. The fourth aspect of policy of politics is it produces policies, decisions by the whole about what the whole is going to do and how they are going to go about it. Decisions about who gets what, when, where, and how, the authoritative allocation of values, civil war by other means, but it's written in stone. This is what's going to happen. There's an objective. Politics is about policy. And finally, and this is very important to me, and I think I hope I can communicate it to you. Politics is about history. History matters. How we got to be America determines, I will deliberately overstate the case, how we got to be America, who we are, is a direct result of what we went through to get here. How England got to be England is a direct result of British history. How China or North Korea got to be North Korea is a direct result of the history of those people, because it refers back to their idea of common identity, their shared imagined reality, and their identity. Which is why politics hits us so hard, particularly in this day and age, because politics and the decisions we make about politics relate directly to our identity as human beings, and that's a lot. Sometimes I get a little bit excited. I hope I didn't turn you off too much. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.